Hello and welcome to the On the Slate movie podcast. I'm Wesley.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Asher.
And On the Slate for today is part 2 of our Christmas special. We'll be deep diving the Christmas classic, one of the most iconic movies of all time, It's a Wonderful Life. Asher, hit the music. So, It's a Wonderful Life was released in theaters in 1946. So, this is 2024 currently. So, if you do the math, that's like 78 years? Mm-hmm. 78 years, wow. Directed by Frank Capra, and it stars Jimmy Stewart, one of the most iconic actors of all time. Also, Donna Reed, Lionel Barrymore, Henry Travers, and Thomas Mitchell. So, we were discussing what we wanted to talk about for our Christmas deep dive episode, and we had a lot of ideas. Last week we gushed about Elf, or at least me and Asher did. We also talked a lot about Home Alone, and we talked about Polar Express as our Christmas favorites. By the way, if you haven't listened to that episode after you listen to this one, you should check that one out. That one was a lot of fun. Maybe our best pod ever.
I think so far. That one we had so much fun on.
We've had a lot of podcasts. This is number 500.
Yeah,
it's only number 5 actually, but
500 divided by 100.
I mean, it feels like we only started this month or this year. You know, like time flies.
But yeah, ignore that loud sound.
Ignore that loud sound.
So yeah, we decided to do It's a Wonderful Life just because it has this lasting legacy of like. Not only just a goofy Christmas movie, but like a meaningful one. And not only is it considered like a fun Christmas movie, but it's also like renowned for its artistry, for its storytelling, for its like performances and a lot of things. So we figured there'd be a lot to talk about and unpack.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was the first time I had ever seen it when I watched it. And I think you two have seen it at some point, right?
Once before,
as well.
but like when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Mine was the previous year. So last Christmas, I watched it for the first time. And then this year, it was the second one.
Yeah. So it was a really, really wonderful film. We're going to break it down in detail. So before we get started, why don't, if you're listening, whatever form you can comment on Spotify or YouTube. I don't know if you can do that on Apple Podcasts or not, but tell us like your experience with this movie because we want to know. We read it. We don't have any comments really. So it's going to be really easy for us to read these comments. Tell us your experience with this movie. We'd love to read them. And maybe if it's really cool, maybe we'll talk about it on the show and you'll be famous forever. So
forever.
Anyway, shall we read the plot summary?
Yeah, let's do it.
This time written by us.
Written by us. Yes, we did not. We did not take a third-party source.
Yes. So, It's a Wonderful Life tells the story of George Bailey, a man from the small town of Bedford Falls. He has high ambitions, wanting to travel the world and build skyscrapers. However, the burdens of his building and loan company and the predatory actions of his business rival, Mr. Potter, caused him to put his dreams on hold. When a large sum of money goes missing, he contemplates ending his life before an angel named Clarence, who hasn't yet earned his wings and wants to prove himself, arrives to try and show George what Bedford Falls would be like if he had never been born.
That was a really good plot summary.
Oh, wow, thanks.
That's the one you wrote?
Whoever wrote it must be pretty good at writing these things.
Should we let's put it to the test now. Like, Jason, do you have yours to read?
You want me to read?
Because you wrote a really good one as well.
Mine? I'll read mine. I put it somewhere in the chat. Hold on.
It'd be funny. Not funny, but like it'd be fun to hear both of y'all's kind of next to each other.
All right.
Because y'all both put in like really good.
So mine is really just an edited version of the review I did on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
So it's kind of... It's not really a review. I kind of edited a lot. But here, the film takes us on a roller coaster that is the life of George Bailey as he longs to escape but is constantly hindered by situations where he must put others' needs before his own to support those around him. Before he realizes that the life he dreamed of has escaped him, and when one too many unfortunate events occur, it seemingly pushes poor George to the edge of a bridge one late Christmas Eve. Only then is he visited by an angel who shows George how truly important he is to his community, family, and the greater world as a whole. So
Well done to both of you guys.
Yours hit more on the themes of the movie, and I think mine hit more on like the plot events. So
see, that's really interesting. So like, I thought it was cool to hear both of y'all's because we watched the same movie, but then the way it came out through y'all's perspective and your translation, like, gets to the same end goal, but at the same time, like, you guys put your own words into it and your own sauce into it. So I thought that was really cool.
I think what you're saying is the next film we do, we all three have to write a synopsis.
Oh man,
yes,
just to get
everybody
a
will be
one-time
so engaged when they're listening to three different explanations of the same movie.
and then we all read ours at the same time.
That'll be wonderful. It'll be a wonderful podcast. Okay.
What?
Heyo.
So before we go any further, spoiler warning: this entire movie is going to be spoiled.
It's 78 years old.
But it's 78 years old. So I mean, I don't even have to say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, this movie was released post World War II era. So I think that probably had a big impact on just how people viewed the movie at the time, or at least throughout the generations. Apparently, it actually was not very popular when it first came out. Like,
really,
box office returns were not great, but over time, it's really been maybe the most famous movie ever, like, or at least one of the most famous movies ever. So, yeah, that post World War II era, I'm just thinking, like, obviously, I wasn't alive then, but how do you guys think that mindset, like, what was the general mindset like in America at that time, and how do you think that might have impacted people that watched the movie?
Well, I think based on what I know about like American history, post-war was a pretty prosperous time in America. Now this movie, the actual events take place over many years, not just post-war America. But like it was this time of like general joy, the men are coming home, the war's over, nobody's dying anymore, more or less. So like it was generally like a positive time. However, I guess we can kind of look back at it now as like something that wasn't really recognized until really like Vietnam or after Vietnam was the impact of like trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder on soldiers. And Mr. Stewart, he was a veteran of the Second World War and actually had just come back from fighting.
Oh, really?
During a lot of the filming.
Really?
I don't know if he actually fought, but he was deployed.
Interesting.
He was I know before I said he was in the U.S. Navy. He was actually in the U.S. Army Air Force.
Okay.
And then officially became part of the actual Air Force.
And this is who played George Bailey?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can kind of see some of that in his performance, especially like toward the end of the movie. So yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of how I see it. It's a happy movie. It ends on a good note, much like I think kind of where the world was at least from America's point of view. Just had a...
I think that was me. I'm sorry. if the microphone caught that, apologies.
America just had a big war and now we're out of it and everything's cool. But it doesn't hide the fact that some terrible like things happened. And I think this movie kind of reflects that. I don't know much about the director or the writers, and their personal experiences with the war, but as the movie like shows, nobody was, I guess, protected or hidden from it. Everybody had a part to play. Right?
So you said the reception wasn't originally like as good as it was over time, right, Wesley?
Yeah, like it's hard to say like exactly what the public discourse was on the movie at the time.
Yeah.
But it's just historically known for like being a disappointment at the box office. It did land like critical acclaim, like Oscar nominations at the time, but yeah, I mean, that didn't translate to money, I guess. But
yeah,
I mean, everybody knows this movie. Like maybe our youngest generation might not, but I still feel like it's one of those movies that gets tossed around and there's enough faithful viewers year after year, you know.
Yeah, I think my thoughts kind of go into what you were saying, Jason, about, you know, that post-World War II era. I think there was a high sense of optimism that people wanted. Not just like that happened, but like they wanted it so bad because of, you know, World War II. And I think maybe...
Well, the Great Depression too. Right
yeah,
that.
And I think maybe the film possibly hit on some notes that people weren't wanting to focus on, because there are happy moments in the film, but the film does really, it doesn't shy away from focusing on things that other people can very much relate to. Like the things that George Bailey experienced in the movie are very realistic for someone in the real world to like actually experience. So maybe they just hit the nail on the head so hard that they were like, well, I don't know if we're ready for this. Like we want like a happy message all the way through, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I wasn't alive then either, but I know, you know.
No, yeah, I mean, it is a very human story. I mean, there are the fantastical elements, right? Like the way that angels are described in this movie, you know, like obviously like isn't actually like what people believe actually happens. But I think it still feels very human in a way that, it's just the things people experience don't feel like you go to the movies. You typically don't see these kind of stories, especially at that time, I can imagine, where everything was like very, I don't know, whimsical and stuff like that. So, but I think what I loved the most about this movie personally was how relatable it is and how personal the stories in the movie were, like how I could connect to them, and the themes of the movie, how they were really developed well and impactful on me. So on our agenda here, I kind of got like 4 main themes that I got out of it. And obviously we could expand on these and add more. Or we can disagree with some of these as well too, if that's necessary. But the first big one for me was like this concept of the American dream and what America in general like symbolizes, and like what it means to like let go of that, or what it's like actually gives people value in their life. 'Cause I think a lot of times our country very much props up like this idea of like, it's a free nation. You can do whatever you want, achieve whatever you want. But I think in reality, a lot of times we have to like sacrifice something or leave something important behind to make those dreams come true, you know, which is like, so like anti-Disney, you know, anti just everything that we're told from media and, you know, even like history books and inspirational speeches, you know, things like that. So I don't know. Yeah. George makes a lot of sacrifices.
He does.
Yeah.
And it really hits home too, like the type of sacrifices he does make. Like one in particular is one that I'm thinking of right now, at least, is when George and Mary just get married. They just got married. And they are on their way to their honeymoon. They have a nice solid, you know, hunk of cash with them to pay for this honeymoon and to have a good time as they travel. And then right as they're leaving town, you know, things are happening with the bank, and then people are coming to George's business, the building and loan company, like they're coming there because their money's invested there, and people are scared about losing their money and where it's being held. And so to help out, George and Mary take their money that they were going to use for the honeymoon and divvy that up amongst their customers and their loyal, you know, clients in a way, so that they can help them in this kind of uncertain time. Yeah. And the fact that like the part that really hit home for me was like they were trying to figure out what to do. Everyone was in the office, and Mary held up the cash like, here, we have some. And then without hesitation, George jumps in. Like, he was so selfless in that moment because, like, when the time came for his character to show, like, his true character really did shine. And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea, Mary. Like, he didn't say that, but you could see in his actions, he was like, that's a wonderful idea. Let's use this money to help those who actually really need it right now. And yeah, I thought that was just a beautiful sacrificial moment. And I think it brought forth so much fruit that, you know, I think it just brought forth a lot of fruit and a lot of joy, because like there is joy when you are sacrificing something to benefit someone else.
Yeah.
I don't know if at least in this case.
I think the movie really made me think about like how often do we actually get what we want in general? And I'm not talking like a favorable outcome, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about specifically you got what you wanted.
And just for some context, George Bailey like really wanted to like travel the world, right? He wanted to see everything, like ever since he was a kid, like the beginning of the movie. And even early when he's like a young man, like about to go to college, like he wanted to go to college, he wanted to do this and build skyscrapers, right? So I just kind of want to set that context if maybe you haven't seen the movie for what Jason's about to say.
Yeah, so to that point, like how often do you think you actually get what you want? It's like almost never. Like, and I'm asking you two guys as well, like how, like, can you think back to a time, like how often or how many times can you count on your hand where you got exactly what you were like hoping to get out of something? Yeah. I mean, these don't have to be negative things either. And in fact, I think, you know, what this movie goes on to prove is that like what you want isn't always good. Isn't always right and won't always benefit you.
Yeah.
What you end up with, you know, specifically through the actions of being a selfless person, you often end up with something more than what you were going after. What would George have if he traveled the world and built a ton of skyscrapers? Because he'd have his name on a building. It's cool, I suppose. I don't know about you guys. I don't know if I'd be fulfilled or truly happy when I'm on my deathbed surrounded by big, tall buildings with my name on it. You know?
Yeah.
Whereas George, you know, despite him fighting it, eventually ends up with not just his family, but his community. I'm not going to talk about the ending quite yet, but, you know, at the end of the film, he is surrounded by his entire town, supporting him.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't have that if he goes off to Europe and France and the Bahamas and Tahiti or wherever he wanted to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And just that theme of like fulfillment comes from not like the things you do necessarily or just like what you achieve, but like a lot of times fulfillment comes from like taking care of each other, you know. I think that was the big thing I got out of like that specific theme, and the movie established really well, is George found just total fulfillment in his life from constantly like using what he could do, his means, to provide for others, whether it was as the building and loan manager, you know, like we mentioned with the $2,000 that they used for the honeymoon, that they didn't use for the honeymoon that they were going to use. Also just from like being a father, like providing for his kids, like he had a lot of kids, he had like 4 kids, and having a wife that, you know, just like these ideas of the American dream, but it was more like others focused than self-focused. Yeah, I mean, that's today a theme that's not explored as much in movies, I don't think. Which you'd think like that's a timeless thing, like take care of each other, help other people, you know, put others' interests above your own interests.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I feel like today, like I don't mean to sound like an old
Back in my day.
Back in my day, like I'm not like that old, but I just feel like in this day and age, it's all about like self pursuit, like pursuit of self and comfort and do what you want to do. You know, things like family and marriage are not held as in high regard as maybe they were in the 40s or even like a decade ago, 2 decades ago, you know? So for me, that was something that I'm like, man, I wish like everybody could see this in 2024, this movie, you know? I mean, cause it doesn't even feel like it's dated or, you know, offensive, right? It's just like, this is just a refresh. It's almost felt refreshing, even though the story has been around for 78 years. I don't know. It's like in our modern movie landscape, you know, it's all about vengeance stories, like these nihilistic, like nothing matters, so just pursue what you want. I don't know, this film like is infused with like purpose in life, and you know, and it didn't feel like it was pandering either. It felt like it's just really genuine to me. So, and
something that, yes, like it was made, you know, in its time period, and you can obviously see that, but I think, you know, to tie back to what you're saying about things that still feel refreshing about it is that there are so many underlying messages and underlying tones that I think are universal and also timeless as well, you know, because a lot of it is revolved around family and, you know, the ones that are meaning the most to you in life and finding purpose in whatever you do. And something too that I thought about was that I think, you know, what George wanted to do, you know, he wanted to leave town in the beginning of the movie. He wanted to leave town. He wanted to go build other things.
He wanted to go to college.
You know, His dad was a builder, but he didn't want to be that type of builder. He wanted to do something, I think, that seemed more flashy to him.
Yeah, he didn't want to take over the
family
building
business.
and loan business.
Yeah.
He wanted to go to college, but instead, like in both of those things, he ended up taking it over because it was like helpful for other people. Like other people would have been.
It was good for the community.
Yeah, because if he didn't do that, then Mr. Potter, who's the villain, who we haven't really talked about much yet.
The crook,
who's like the big bank guy that wants to like screw everybody out of their money, and he would
have just bought their company.
He would have dissolved it. He tried to dissolve it.
Yeah.
And also, he didn't go to college, but he ended up sending his brother off to college, which, you know, so I don't know. Those are just some more specific examples of what he gave up for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, to go and build the things that he wanted to build originally, I don't think there was anything in that, like in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it was a lot about his view of it. You know, like what does that actually mean to him? One, it means an escape from where he's at now. Because for a while he kept calling the town he grew up in crummy, you know, and I'm like,
he's like, this place sucks.
Like, that's pretty tough, you know? And then, you know, it also meant basically there was meaning in it that I think for him was not fully appropriate. You know, I think he relied on it almost in an idealistic sense of like, this is what's going to bring me the joy and the happiness that I need and that I want. Which is funny because as we go throughout the movie, like you begin to see him you continue to see him enjoy life, but he's not doing what he thought he would, but at the same time he's still doing something meaningful, you know? And yeah, I don't really have a good cap for that statement because I have more thoughts, but I don't know how to word it yet.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine.
On the topic of selflessness or like sacrifice, there's a scene kind of later in the movie where Mr. Potter offers George a job for $20,000 a year, a 3-year contract. Now, to give a little bit more context to Mr. Potter, this guy is like awful. He's terrible.
Yeah.
He kind of forces people into these awful loans and charges insane interest and keeps people living in these rundown homes and apartments within the city or the town.
Yeah.
And he basically owns the rest of the town, if not for George and his family's company,
Yeah.
who constantly fight throughout the movie to keep Mr. Potter from owning the town completely.
Mm-hmm. He's like the Scrooge that never turned good.
Yeah. And in fact, the movie hits on it a lot where Mr. Potter, he is constantly frustrated by things he doesn't have, despite having so much. But he offers Bailey, or Mr. George, a job for $20,000 a year. For context, $20,000 a year today, and I'm using 1940s money. I think that scene might actually take a little bit earlier, take place before 1940. But this is for like 1940. And inflation, $450,000 a year.
A year?
Yes. So, look, George is a better person than me, probably.
That's very weighty.
I'm just, and I know he's, George is a made up person, right? But I'd find it really hard myself to say no to that.
Yeah.
$450,000 right now would completely change my life.
But he says no on principle. He originally is gonna take it.
Yeah, but then when he shook his hand, he's like, wait a second, like, he didn't say anything, but you saw it in his face and the
disgust.
His disgust. He's like, I'm shaking hands with Mr. Potter. This is not right.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll talk more about the characters later, but that's just like a great picture of like how George and Mr. Potter are like exact opposites, and I think Mr. Potter reflects like what George would have been if he would have pursued his own like interests. Like you said something, Jason, like how Mr. Potter always wanted more and more. And I think that's kind of the danger that the movie warns of, like pursuing that harmful view of the American dream.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything like wrong with wanting freedom and, stability or anything. I just think at what point do you just get to the point where you can't say, oh, I'm content. I'm satisfied with what I have. Like I've built so much. I just want more and more and more, Whereas George, he finds that contentment in like his family, and the people that he's helped and the community, which is the next big theme that I wanted to go over, like how the film gives you it communicates the importance of community. So
can I say one thing before we move on to that note?
Yes.
So I'm just thinking, like, that moment when Mr. Potter was basically trying to hire George Bailey and basically swindle him into it. I'm very much thinking of Darth Sidious's relationship with Anakin. Like the way, like he knew the words to say to get to the heart of George Bailey. He very craftily manipulated his words to get George's attention. He's like, I know what strings to hit on, so I'm going to hit on those. Yeah. And same thing with, Darth Sidious and Anakin. It's like, if it's like, this moment where it's like, no, when I was watching, I was like, George, say no. Like, I already know what happened, but I was like, George, say no. Because it's like, you saw him sit in the chair, you saw him shake his hand, and it's like, dude, if you keep going down this path, you're going to end up like this crook. Like, look across from you. Like, you don't want to be like that. It's like this manipulative mentoring. It's like, dude, don't fall into it. So, yeah.
Well, a thought I had was, Potter kind of entices him with like, oh, you can provide so much more for your wife and your kids.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, like, if George took this, Mary would, like, leave him.
She would be so upset.
For rolling over and letting Potter, like, take over. You know what I mean? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, in doing that, in wanting to provide, he would have lost her. I imagine. We don't know for sure, but based off of the character of Mary, I think very much, like you mentioned earlier, how she was the first to offer up their honeymoon money for the town. That if George had taken up Mr. Potter's offer, that she would be like, this is like, what are you doing?
Yeah. That's a great segue into community now.
Yeah, and I think we've already touched on community as well. Well,
let's talk about the community as as a character in the movie. There's a ton of characters, but I think the community, his town,
Like
of
Bedford
Bedford
Falls.
Falls, is a character on its own. As sort of like both like this kind of driving factor behind a lot of the events of the movie, but also as a great like almost like I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of encapsulates. I don't know if that's the word.
Encapsulates.
No,
Encapsulate.
Encapsulates?
I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that it kind of emphasizes George's character. It highlights it. I don't know how. I don't know if I'm explaining this well. If you guys get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I think it is a character for sure. Yeah. And
It's an interesting thing. What you like? It's cool.
What's the
thinking
opposite of a foil? You know, if Mr. Potter is George's foil, then the town would be George's positive
the opposite
foil.
of a foil would just be the character in the first
Okay,
place.
you know what I mean? A character that doesn't contrast George, but rather uplifts him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And
a very
emphasizes his
yeah.
positive qualities.
I like that.
I don't know what
It's
the official
it's a
literary
very
term for that
interesting
would be.
take.
Ally, I don't know. But
Yeah, I like that though because it's so cool seeing how supportive the community was for George, even when he didn't see it. Like they were supportive for him when he wanted to leave and go travel, and then when he didn't, and when he stayed, and then when he got into certain situations that one could not ask for help for prideful reasons, they were still there to support him. And that showed a lot, you know. Like there's the moment where that one worker gives him the gift of that suitcase because
Mr. Gower.
well, yeah, but there was like a worker as like the one who gave it to him. But like
Joe.
at the source, yeah, Mr. Gower was the one who gave him this gift. He's like, look, I know you've been wanting to travel, so I'm going to give this to you as a gift. And he was supportive of that. But then at the same time, when George got married and Mary and George moved into the house that very much needed renovation, like it wasn't technically really worthy to live in. Yeah. You know, you have Bert and Ernie outside helping them make this a very romantic night for them, their first night, you know, being married, and they're out there singing when the vinyl is done playing, you know, it's like they're there for him. And it's really cool because despite the situation, they're there for him. Yeah.
Bert and Ernie, not related to Sesame Street, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, we found that out.
We researched that. Completely unrelated.
The creator of Sesame Street said, "What are you talking about?"
He said,
Bert and Ernie who?
I don't know. I don't know if I buy that, but anyway.
My puppets are the OG Bert and Ernie's. I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah.
No, I'm just playing.
Yeah, but I think, just to rehash like what we talked about, like Mr. Potter is like what George would have been if he pursued his own idea of what a fulfilling life would be. And then like the community that he lives with is like the reality of what he has by the path that he's chosen. So, and I think that leads me to like maybe my lone criticism of the movie, which I don't even know if it's like even a criticism, but I would say that I don't think that theme of like community versus Mr. Potter really like allows for like the reality of, I don't know, it feels very black and white. And I don't know if it's like in touch totally with reality of how things can be kind of gray. Like there could be bad eggs in the community that take advantage of you, you know. I don't know if it's like even trying to like be super nuanced in that way, but because I feel like, if you can also like, there's realistic like possibility that if you don't pursue your dreams, that you could end up, you know, like regretful or people and these people that you're trying to uplift could also like take advantage of you. So I will say that like if you view the movie black and white as like super literal to reality, I think you could be disappointed. But again, like I don't know if that's necessarily a fault of the film. if the film's like not trying to like touch on that really. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that
It's a very interesting thought. I was just like, whoa.
I think it's a lot of people, myself included, kind of have like this romanticized idea of how the world was before like the 80s, I
Before
guess.
like social media came out and like
Where,
well, not in the
towns-
80s, obviously. Social media is after that.
towns were smaller, cities were smaller. You obviously had places like New York and LA for the longest time, but just where communities, where people knew each other pretty well. Like I have, for context, I mean, outside of the like smaller communities I've been a part of, I have no sense of community within the city I live in, like as a city, right? Obviously, you know, like with church or with friends groups and stuff like that, there's a sense of community there. But like as someone who identifies as being from a place, I can't tell you I know, you know, outside of my immediate circle, right? Which I don't, you know, I just don't know if that was true, you know. I mean, maybe even like 40 years ago. For instance, like my father, now he did grow up in a smaller town that's still small to this day, where everybody kind of knew everybody. And to your point, Wesley, there were definitely like, you know, there was just people who were known for being, you know, bad or straight up criminals. Like, oh, you don't go around him. He's the town's drunk.
Mr. Potter's very like almost cartoonish in like his villainy, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
He's in a position of power, whereas in reality, you know, this is all like secondhand information from my father, where there were definitely bad people, but they weren't necessarily always people in power. They were your everyday, they were your neighbor. But at the same time, there was still, and you know, he could be nostalgic for it, right? But there's still this idea, even in the mid 80s, where everybody did trust each other more within his town, despite its issues. And I think the movie romanticizes that concept a lot. And I know for a fact that no town in America was probably that picturesque.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of truth in that, in these smaller towns and these smaller communities where people, you know, the success of yourself is reliant on the success of your neighbors. And that's not true today.
Yeah.
Like my neighbors next door, whatever happens to them has no bearing on what happens to me, more or less, right? If their business fails, I've probably never been to it. So like, what's it matter to me?
Yeah.
But, you know, in the movie, if the building and loan fails, I mean, that's hundreds of, well, I don't know how many people are in the town, dozens of people's livelihoods that are just ruined. So not to be like, it's really about profit incentive. But, you know, it's this mutual understanding that together we succeed,
Yeah.
you know?
And I like how when they go to the flashback sequence or the clearance sequence, where, you know, he's seeing like what if, like all of this, and we'll go into more detail in that section here in a bit, but how he sees the community was completely different than it was like when he was helping people. So if he had never been born, you know, the community ended up being called, one, Pottersville. So like the very embodiment of like everything he's against, right? In the name, but also like everything was like a bar or like a strip club or, you know, all of this.
Or like a fighting ring.
Yeah. You know, all of these like obviously like stereotypically, you know, bad things.
Yeah. But profitable to Potter.
And they like fulfill that like carnal pleasure, you know, that you might want to seek. Whether it's like through drinking or, you know, women or
brawling, betting on brawling.
Yeah. So, I forgot what I was saying. Yeah. So I can see like how the character of Bedford Falls was completely different and hinged kind of on the decisions that he made, because he was like, he proved himself to be like a pillar of that community. So anyway, well, I do think it is set up as a black and white kind of thing, and that could be like prone to abuse, right? Like, I think the reality of just darkness in the world, like people are always going to be taking advantage of people the darkness in your heart, the selfishness gets the best of everybody, you know. But I will say that I still would recommend like watching this today, because I think that could like inspire you or like refresh your heart on this kind of mindset of like, what if we stood together more unified as a community? And although it doesn't perfectly reflect reality, it is in a certain way like a cheesy happy ending story. I still think it is a really important watch for everybody. I think it'll inspire you to like want to unify as a community, like I just said, and, you know, try to stand against, you know, obvious like bad things, like not helping out and seeking your own pleasures at the expense of other people. So
two things to that. So one, like on the note of, you know, community coming together, it's just cool thinking about how I've experienced that like in my own ways. Like this is kind of funny because it's even a Christmas memory, but I remember, I think I was told this when I was older, but I think there was one Christmas year where like my mom was pretty sick and my dad and mom were kind of just, I think, struggling financially a bit. And so I think it was a bit harder to make, you know, Christmas what they really wanted it to be for my sister and I. And honestly, I remember that Christmas being like, that's a Christmas morning that I remember out of just the joy and the pleasure I had, because my aunt and my uncle actually came and spent it with us, and they actually helped out. They were both my dad's siblings, and so they came in, you know, this aspect of family and community, they came in and they helped, and they, you know, were like, hey, let's help make this a Christmas for your kids, you know. And so thinking on that, it's like, yeah, you know, there are really cool things that can happen when people do come together, whether it's family or friends, just that community. Yeah. But the other thing too is like, I think individually as well, it's a really good movie to watch if you're like, despite the community part, I think just as an individual, I think it can lend itself to helping you evaluate yourself. And I think that sometimes people don't want to do that. Like, you know, they want to watch a movie to escape sometimes, or to get their mind off of things, which there's nothing wrong with, you know, certain entertainment, but you also have to kind of like look at the root of why you're doing it, you know? And so I think this movie was unapologetically hitting on things in a way to get you to reflect on your own heart posture and like your own lifestyle. Like, you know, is there anything in me that I need to examine so that I don't end up like Mr. Potter, or that I don't get to a point of breakdown like George Bailey? You know, I think there's a very real sense of that. And for me, I think there's a lot of, as a Christmas movie, I guess, you know, like there's a lot of warm things about that, you know, just thinking about going to bed that same night and knowing it's brisk winter air outside, you know, you got Christmas lights, and it's just you in your bed, and you're just thinking about your own life, whether it's gratitude or examination. Like, I think the film can bring forth a lot of things that maybe wouldn't have been brought up if you didn't watch the movie, I guess, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
No,
Oh, yeah.
I'm picking it up.
Okay,
Dude,
cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Asher. I think that's important, like how these themes really touch on you in a personal way, you know? So, yeah, and just, I kind of want to talk about some of these characters in specific. You know, there's a few other themes that show up too, and I think we've kind of talked about them a little bit, so we don't have to be so rigid with this. But I want to talk about Clarence, the character. I think he's very interesting.
The angel without wings.
Yeah, he's like such this iconic character in movie history, and he's only in the movie for like
3 minutes.
Maybe
No, not 3 minutes.
maybe like 15, 20 minutes. I didn't add it up, but
yeah,
you know,
kind of like, is it considered the third act when he's showing him around Bedford Falls of what it would look like without him there?
that's definitely like the third act of the movie, you know.
The movie is, outside of what we're about to talk about, it is structured a little bit non-traditionally.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, because the flashback, see, it's kind of like the whole thing's a flashback, right? Because at the beginning, it's Clarence, the angel, talking to the other angels, which Joseph and I forget the other one, Franklin, I think.
I don't know.
Anyway,
I just was like, the main thing I took away was stars and galaxies talking to this guy.
Yeah, it was this very weird view of like angels and spirituality and stuff. I don't know.
But even before that, the very opening scene of the movie was the night that George was gonna jump off the bridge.
Yeah.
And everyone, like, it was just kind of like this sweeping shot over the town and certain houses, and we heard people praying for George.
Yeah.
So everything kind of like technically happened before that, and that night was kind of like the present time, I think.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is interesting because, Frank's the name of the director of the movie. George, he, in his bank loan, or his uncle, what's his name? William? Is that right?
Uncle Billy.
Uncle Billy?
You were close.
I said the very formal version. Uncle William.
He is technically Uncle William, I'm sure.
He lost like a large sum of money, like $8,000. And of course, he accidentally turned it over to Mr. Potter in an odd exchange. I don't know if y'all heard that car alarm, but anyway.
Sorry about that.
He lost all this money and gave it to Mr. Potter on accident.
Yeah.
So that's basically what starts this whole thing where George like hits a breaking point, you know, and he's like, man, I think he looks back at his life and he's like, I've just given all that I have. And according to the inflation calculator, it's $140,000 in today's money.
Shoo.
So anyway, there's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And this starts this whole like breaking point. Like he just snaps, right? And like starts kicking stuff around. He looks at his whole life and said like, I spent my whole life giving up my dreams and helping other people. And this is what happens to me, you know? So he ends up like wanting to like throw himself off a bridge, like end it all. And so Clarence comes in, who's like an angel who's kind of been narrating the movie in a way, or it's less of a narration and more of like this occasional conversation he has with the other angels.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I guess commenting on the movie.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of interesting. So that leads him to like meet, he jumps in Clarence comes down to the bridge as well and jumps off. Mm-hmm. And George, being George, actually jumps in to save Clarence.
Yeah.
So he ends up jumping in the river, but completely different reason.
To save someone, not to end his own life.
Yeah, which is crazy. And so that's how it all starts. And then he was like, I wish I had never been born. And Clarence like, oh, I can use this as an opportunity to show him and to help him so he can he can grow his own wings and stuff. So anyway.
What did you think about, like, since it was your first time watching it, did that scene make sense? Like the way it was edited? Because we see George getting to the bridge and then we see like Clarence in another shot, like leaning against the bridge, looking at George from a distance, I guess. And then there's some time before Clarence jumps in the water. For me, at the first time I watched it, I was a little confused. I was like, wait, did George just jump? Or like, who's like I don't know.
Yeah,
did you track well with the way they edited it?
I don't remember.
And framed it up?
I don't really remember. I'd have to watch that sequence again, but I don't think it was confusing, but
yeah, I didn't have any issues.
Okay. Maybe it was just more of a me thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
But you understood that George didn't jump first.
I got that. I think he was like, oh, help me, and he jumps in. He's like, help, save me, and then George like it shows him like jump in. So,
Yeah, and might I say, George did a fine dive. Like that's an Olympic worthy dive. The way he jumped in.
They might have had a stunt double do that. I don't know. But
that's a good point.
Maybe Jimmy Stewart was just a mean diver.
Was in the Air Force.
Oh, true.
I don't know what that has to do with diving, but he sure.
I mean, maybe he had to jump out of a plane. I don't think that's the same thing. The same technique.
I think that's the Army, actually.
Oh.
And then paratroopers.
See, I'm just so
maybe,
ignorant.
I don't know anything about
I don't know.
military. Don't listen to
But
me.
anyway, I think, that whole sequence is, I think people make that out to be like the majority of the movie, but it's actually only like a short aspect of the movie.
It is.
Reading the plot synopsis of the movie, it's like when George is visited by an angel.
Yeah.
And like that's like the last like 20 minutes.
Yeah, you got a lot of grass to walk through before you get there.
Yeah, and I think we all have had kind of those what if moments in our lives. Like, I think we think about what would our life be like, if this and that, So I think that's a turning point for George's character, really, to be like, to lose the regret that he feels for not achieving like what he thought his dreams were. Because he was able to see like actually what he had accomplished, which was like bringing a community together and how that was like more important. So yeah, I think that's a theme that really just supports the other like main themes of the movie. But yeah, Clarence himself like I think he's more there to be like comedic and more of like a plot kind of device in a way. But I mean, he is endearing. Like he's a classic character, and I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, is there anything with his character that really stuck out to you?
I think he was like surprisingly intelligent. They kind of play him off as like this angel who doesn't know too much. But when he's actually interacting with George, and he's like funny or a little more like aloof, he seems very emotionally intelligent. And handles George's situation with a lot of humor, but also like a lot of like intentional, like I don't know, almost tact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He like lets him mess up and do dumb things.
He's like a parent. He's like a parent who's allowing their child to like, find out.
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
But also like still being there to kind of loosely guide him to the point of, erasing him from existence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Clarence is a really cool character.
Yeah.
Really smart.
It was really believable the way they introduced him, because the whole movie is not really related to some spiritual story. Like the whole movie is about a boy growing up into a man, a lot of real world problems, and then they introduce an angel. And I think the way they introduced Clarence, yes, we met them in the beginning, but his true involvement really comes in at the end for George. And I think the way they did that was believable to me. Like, it didn't feel like it was this I guess family drama movie and then they were wanting to make it something else in the last act. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced like a movie that felt like they were trying to be two things but they never like merged it well. I could give examples, but I don't want to throw... I wouldn't throw shade, but I feel like I would have to have more things to say about it to give more of like an educated comment. But I think Clarence was like a likable angel coming into the world. And even the way he kind of revealed himself to the bridge guard, I guess is what he was, the bridge guard, because the bridge guard saw Clarence and George jumping into the water.
He like
the way he was telling him, he's like, yeah, I'm an angel. And then like every time Clarence answered one of the guard's questions, like the guard continued to get more like, what? Like, what's going on here? And like to the point where he just like left. He's like, I'm creeped out now.
He's like, you guys are weird. I'm gonna get out of here before it gets dangerous.
That was hilarious. Yeah. And I think he also represents like this minor theme in the movie of divine intervention. And like, I don't know how important that theme is to the movie as a whole. I think it's more secondary, but I think it's worth mentioning. In that era, I mean, America was a lot more like Christian and like religious than I think it is probably today, at least culturally. And
at least mainstream too, I think,
Yeah.
wise.
And
well, in certain cases, I guess.
yeah, in certain cases in the mainstream, like I think everybody probably said they, believed in God. But I think, I mean, bad angel theology aside, like I think the movie hints at that, but I think if it has anything to say about divine intervention, I think it's more of like this idea that God isn't like he is a miracle worker, but like he doesn't just like snap his fingers and everything's fixed. Like I think it shows like, oh, he wants you to like reflect and like see, reflect back on like the impact you've made in other people's lives. And like it took like a divine perspective for him to like see it from a bigger picture.
Yeah.
So yeah. And obviously like, I don't think, angels are literally like galaxies and stars.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So if you believe in that sort of stuff, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what y'all think, but I think that plays like a minor role, but I think it's less about like the divine intervention aspect and more about the, reflecting on your life. But maybe it points out this theme in reality where a lot of times spiritually, like you learn by reflecting on your life and seeing what life would have been like if you, it helps you grow in wisdom and discernment and things like that. So.
Yeah. And George was at such a point, like George was so blinded by the truth, and because he was so focused on the issues. Like when he had that snapping point where, his uncle lost the money. He went to Mr. Potter to ask for help, right? And then Mr. Potter was like, I'm not going to help you. I'm going to call the police. Like I can sue you, or like I can put claims against you to put you in jail. Like you're better dead than alive. And that's what put the seed in his head of like, oh, maybe I should not be alive. I think, through that breaking point, even when he came home after that, he started nagging about all these random things, like the car that they had, the house being drafty. Like it really broke him to focus on anything that was not like it just led him down this very negative path. And I think that divine intervention was very valuable because it was, I think, a necessary thing for that character that had to happen for his reflection to be meaningful and to actually happen too. Because even when Clarence was showing him around town, it took George some time to still believe Clarence.
To accept.
Yeah. Like he
happened.
didn't accept him as an angel right at the get-go. Like he still was like, you're crazy.
You had too much to drink. I've had too much to drink.
Yeah. Why is my town completely different now? Like it took him still time to believe and reflect, even in a divine intervention, which I think shows how deep he was in his hole, Yeah.
So, I guess that is important. And I think there's one part where he said, I'm not really a praying man, but he ends up like praying out of desperation and then like, oh, the angel comes, right? So there is that aspect of like, you could interpret that as like the movie trying to tell you like prayer like works, in that sense. So, divine intervention is an element of the movie.
Yeah. Thoughts, Jason?
I mean, not really. I mean, I think it's a part of the movie. I don't know how much it was trying to say with that.
Yeah. I don't think it was like the main theme by any means.
I do get this image of even in the face of divinity, we still like to deny it.
Yeah.
And I think it's very true. I don't think the movie was trying to tell us that. I think it was really hitting on George was so in his head and so worried about all these other things that he, couldn't couldn't see what was going on, and I think that was just an extension of that.
Yeah.
But you know, in a headcanon of mine, right? It's like, oh, it's kind of commenting on this idea that even when we're faced with something truly special, we like to reject it.
Yeah.
For one reason or another, we'll find ways to not believe it or not trust it or whatever. But I don't think the movie's really trying to say anything about that.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we're thinking too much into it. Yeah. So there are like some other supporting characters real quick that I want to like talk about. So there's his wife, Mary, and I think there's also a woman named Violet. Is that her name?
Yeah.
Veronica.
Vi?
No, it's Violet.
I think it's Violet, right?
Really?
The blonde girl.
Well, he calls her like Vi, I think, maybe. No, am I tripping? Hold on.
Well, you're not falling. That was an okay
Yes,
joke.
Violet.
Yeah, Violet
It
Bick.
is Violet.
Violet Bick. So after we watched the movie, I realized, like, or I asked you guys the question. I was like, what do you think the purpose of like Violet's character was? And then after thinking about it, I think I kind of know what it was. And I think it has to do with that like first theme we're talking about.
Enlighten us.
Of like, she kind of almost reflected Mr. Potter in a way of like, if he would have chosen her and married her, like that would have been like representing him choosing kind of these selfish pursuits in life. Because she was very much like a surface level, like, I'm just really pretty, so you should try and marry me just because of that. But with Mary, like he had more of a connection to her on like a heart level, you know? So I think that was one thing that I kind of got out of like, okay, so Violet is another representation of like what if or like what would have happened and
There's a really good scene
or what could have happened.
where he's like, right before he has this argument with Mary that leads to them actually getting married. He encounters Violet in the city or in the town. And he's like, Violet, come with me. Let's go frolic in the fields or something and stare at the moon.
In the moonlight, yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, that's disgusting.
Yeah, it was like these like really like I thought it was like, wow, that sounds like a great time.
Yeah.
I'll go
But she
with you,
was like,
George.
no, I just want to do all this fancy, like expensive stuff.
She's like, I thought you were going to take me to a restaurant and
Yeah.
do all these things. But no, he was like, dude, let's go walk in the grass.
Yeah.
But like him and Mary, when they went on their like quote unquote date, like they had this fun little dance where they almost fell in the pool and then they ended up falling in the pool.
Yeah.
Which is like something that I think Violet's character would have just been like completely embarrassed and ruined by if she
Yeah.
fell in a pool. And I think also when they were like singing in that alleyway or whatever, you know, they're just like doing all this like fun stuff that, you know, you wouldn't think of like as a fancy, like expensive date. So yeah, I think, and it's funny because Violet ends up like, George ends up helping Violet.
Yeah.
George is just like literally the best person ever, but because she was like trying to move to New York, but then she ends up like helping him. So she even had a little arc.
Well, he like gives her money to like,
Yeah.
here you go. That'll cover you to get there. And then she like gives it back.
Yeah, in the end, like when George runs out of $8,000, you know,
Yeah.
she ends up like contributing to help like make that up.
Yeah.
Like by the way, we didn't talk about that, but like the whole community at the end like gave money to fulfill that $8,000 gap.
Yeah.
It was basically them just like returning the favor of like what George has been doing the whole time. So,
Which to tie back into your focus on Mary, she was the one who rallied everyone, which I thought was like that hits. Like as someone who is married and sees, you know, true qualities in someone that are something that stands across, you know, the test of time. It's the fact that, you know, while he was out, you know, about to jump off the bridge and then traveling around the town, seeing what it was like without him, with Clarence, the fact that he comes back and Mary this whole time was rallying everyone. I was like, that just speaks a lot, you know. What, you know, and it also makes me think like, what would Violet have done if she was the wife? You know, like it could have been very different.
she wouldn't have given up the $2,000 that they had for the honeymoon earlier.
Would she even still be around too? Like,
yeah, she might have left him.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. I like how they handled that, and they even gave Violet like the redemption at the end too, which I thought was cool. Like Mr. Potter didn't have that, right? So
yeah,
Harry Bailey, George's brother.
Oh yeah,
little brother.
We haven't talked about him a lot, but he is probably one of the most important like side characters.
He's the stud of the movie. He's the stud little brother.
Another point to just servicing George as a character. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of the movie, the very first scene. Well, the very first scene with George, actually in it, his brother Harry falls into the ice. Mm-hmm. They're like playing in this like pond or something. He falls into the ice, and George goes in to save him, and he loses. You think it'd be a bigger point, but it really isn't. But he loses hearing in one of his ears. I don't know if it's left or right. But left?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he loses hearing in one of his ears because of an infection. And throughout the movie, Harry serves as like this character who kind of gets to do everything George doesn't. Mm-hmm. He gets to go to college. He gets an education with a nice job.
He's a war hero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he goes to go off to fight in the Second World War. Is a war hero. He's like an ace pilot who shot down 20 planes or something like that. Mm-hmm. Something insane. Gets awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor from the president himself. But throughout the whole movie, not once is George jealous or resentful or mean to Harry about these things. And in fact, he pays for Harry to go to college. You know, he takes the money that he saved for himself that he's now no longer going to use because he's staying, with the family business, to give it to Harry. He's like, look, you go to this thing. And then when Harry comes back from college, promising to help take over so George can then go get an education. Well, he sees that Harry has a wife now, and her dad is offering him this really nice job. Mm-hmm. And George is like, I can't let you abandon that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he tells him to forget it. Forget staying here in Bedford Falls.
Yeah.
So, and then in the alternate universe, in the Potterverse, if you will.
Not that Potterverse. The Mr. Potterverse.
The Mr. Potterverse, where George never existed, Harry's dead. He died as a kid.
Yeah, like he.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was and also the people.
All the people that Harry saved during the war are dead too.
Oh my gosh.
So when you think about, truly, when you think about how many people you affect, it's not just like the people you talk to.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're to touch on the butterfly effect. Every single thing you do probably impacts hundreds of people. Right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe not every single thing, but a lot of the things you do.
Yeah. Without even knowing. Yeah.
Right? Like George didn't think about all the lives he indirectly saves by just not letting his brother die.
Mm. Yeah. That's a very beautiful point.
I think that speaks to the mastery of the writing and like screenplay of this movie, of how all of these different characters represent something thematically to the movie, and how it's like one of the best written characters, like George Bailey, and just everyone in his life, and how that all serves like what the movie's trying to say. It doesn't feel like any character's in there for no reason, Right? Mm-hmm. And and even like another character, Uncle Billy, not Uncle William.
Uncle Billy.
Uncle Willie.
He's a confusing one to figure out, but he's like this. He's like kind of this oaf, this like lazy, like kind of, I don't know, dumb is the right word, but he's the one that loses $8,000. He's always making silly choices. Like if he would have, I think in the what if scenario, the Clarence scenario, I think he ends up like in jail or like in an insane asylum or something.
Yes, he's in an insane asylum after losing because the building and loan.
Yeah,
because he isn't able to. So George's father, who actually runs the place, dies. That's when George takes over. In the Mr. Potterverse, there's no George. So Mr. Billy, Uncle Billy, takes over
and then sells it right to Mr. Potter.
I don't know if I think he just can't keep. I think he loses it. He just can't run because to your point, he's kind of not business savvy.
I think he almost represents that gray area I was talking about. Like somebody like on your side though, that's like kind of hindering you in a way. I don't know.
But like unintentionally, Uncle Billy isn't doing anything out of malice.
Right.
He doesn't lose $8,000 just cause.
Yeah. He's one of those characters that provides moments of growth for George.
Yeah.
Like, okay, he just lost $8,000. Like, how are you going to treat this? And I think at first George was, you know, as time went on, George, I think, got more frustrated with him. And he basically, like, pulled him by the collar. He's like, tell me where you hid the money. Like, this is going to end bad for us. Like, one of us is going to go to jail. It's not going to be me. And he's calling him names and stuff. And it's like, I think there a lot of moments where his uncle is involved. Not every moment, but a lot of moments I think provided for this opportunity to have George make a choice of his characteristic and how he would respond to the situation. Because Uncle Billy, like, he didn't just lose the money. He lost the money because he went up to Mr. Potter to gloat. Like,
and then he gave the money to Mr. Potter.
Like, by accident.
Literally
was crazy.
the worst case scenario.
So he's counting the money at the bank.
Yeah.
In an envelope. Mr. Potter comes in reading a paper. He snatches the paper out of Mr. Potter's hand because it's talking about Harry Bailey being a war hero. And he's like, look what the Bailey brothers have done.
And he was,
yeah.
And
He's
he also
leaves
holding
the
money.
envelope, like holding the envelope and the newspaper, and hands it back to Mr. Potter. Which, I know we're not talking about criticisms right now, but if there's one, like, issue I have with the movie, it's that scene. And how Uncle Billy never recognizes that that's what happened. Despite, and I know they kind of hint towards, like, he's kind of, like, not all there.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, man. He just counted the money, interacts with Mr. Potter, then realizes he doesn't have the money. Where do you think it went?
He traced all of his steps, even to, like, his path arriving to the bank. Yeah, he didn't really
he searches
think about his interaction with Mr. Potter.
Well, he searches at, like, his home and at the building and loan, and I'm like, for a fact you had the money at the bank. Why would it be anywhere but there?
To be fair, the guy was kind of dumb, so maybe he just didn't think about it. He's dumb.
Either the movie, I don't think the movie does a good enough job of portraying that he's that irresponsible. They definitely portray a level of irresponsibility with the character, but there's only certain, like, I just couldn't, like,
I see your point. Yeah.
I think an 8-year-old kid would be able to track. I have the money now, and I don't have it here.
I gave it to
Where did it go?
I gave it to Mr. Potter. That's probably not an 8-year-old. That's probably someone younger. But.
So
Mr. Potter has the $8,000.
Sorry, I went into critiques a little bit.
No, that's good. That's why
okay.
We're here.
I think it's healthy to, even though this movie is so widely known, I think it's healthy to bring up things that possibly could have been better, or things that you thought didn't quite hit it on the nose.
Do we have time to talk about, like, the technical aspects of the film, or do we want to talk about something else?
That's what we're going to talk about next, and we don't have a timer right now, but who knows how long we've been going at this point.
Usually we have a timer, but
this could be like we could be an hour and a half in. I don't
this
remember.
Is
someone named Dasher forgot to put a clock out for us.
Someone named Jason and Wesley also forgot.
Special, so it can go as long as it needs to.
This is the one that makes us go viral.
Since this is Christmas Eve, this can go on until Santa arrives.
Ho ho ho! Merry Christmas.
Anyway, thanks for listening. So, we were going to talk about, as per Jason's request and also the agenda's request, where it says, by the way, we were only supposed to talk about the themes for 15 minutes, according to the agenda.
The themes were too grand and important to only leave it to 15 minutes.
So, there's a lot of things I think that stood out from a technical standpoint, and I think the way they made movies back then is different than the way they make them now.
Faux show.
I think today people are a lot more creative with filming, like where they like multiple locations. I think back in the day it was just like, here's your set, here's your studio lot, build your set where you can. Limited resources. I mean, stuff like that. So I think with this movie, what I liked the most was like how they made the most with what they had. And really just, I think the best technical aspect of the movie was the acting. Like, I don't know if that's technical. I think it's a technical. Just like, Jimmy Stewart. This is like an all-time great like lead actor like performance. Maybe the best. Like one of the best I've ever seen. And just how the director Frank Capra would just put the camera, block people in a very specific way. Like blocking, if you don't know what that means, it's just like how you put people in the shot in the scene, and the location, the exact spots they're standing or sitting or doing whatever. And he just like put them in their spots and let the camera roll. And these like entire scenes would just be filmed in like one take. Like I don't know if that was a resource limitation where they just couldn't afford to like spend a whole lot of time editing, or they didn't have enough time to do 20 takes. They're just like, we got to get it right now. I don't know the whole story behind that, but there was a lot of like scenes where we just play on, and they expertly crafted them to and performed them.
A lot of breathing room for them to just let the scene play out.
Exactly. And that adds a whole lot also just to the character of Bedford Falls in general. Like being able to just put you in this city and in the small town with these people. I
think the film is surprisingly modern for 1946. And I think you mentioned on it more touching on like the themes and stuff like that. But I think the way it looks, obviously it's in black and white, but the way it looks, the way it's shot, and I'm not saying it's like, it's no Dune, but, I feel like someone could produce a movie that was shot like that today, and it'd be perfectly acceptable for quote unquote today's standards. There is some stiffness, there is some editing issues. I think those are very much products of the time that wouldn't even exist today. So if you just look at it from the fact, like if you just shot it in the same manner, and you got rid of any lingering like issues that there's some editing issues, and I think some of the camera work's a little stiffer, but I think that's just because they can't do too much with it. But like, I'm nitpicking. You know what I mean? I'm not. There's nothing glaring. There's nothing like, oh, this movie feels like it was made 80 or 78 years ago. Right? I feel like it could have come out today, and it would have been just as obviously for how timeless it is. It's just as good. But I think it is very modern. They were. The filmmakers were like. They were doing things. I don't know how else to put it. They were doing things.
I think they were really reliant on just the sheer presence and powerhouse performance that Jimmy Stewart gives. And I think they just were like, we're going to just play to his strengths. We're going to shoot him. He's going to have a lot of screen time. Like, I don't know if a lead character ever has as much like camera on him acting,
Because he's in... The character's in every scene, right? I know there's a younger version of the character, but for George Bailey as a whole, there's not a scene where he's not in it, right? Except for the beginning.
There's a couple of like Mr. Potter talking to his like aide or something.
Oh,
there's an occasional scene here and there, like the whole scene where like Uncle Billy loses the money, like
Yeah, but right.
Most scenes, like he's in most scenes, and he has a lot of dialogue, and he delivers it all like not only just his line delivery, but just his facial acting. It's all just really convincing in this character. Just the way he makes eye contact with people when he talks. It's just like wow, like he's really committed to like the kindness of this character. What's the right word? Like the chivalry, the way that he respects people, and that kind of goes away in his angry moments. And I think it's just a very difficult performance that he pulls off really, really well. So I don't think any of the other actors really like blew me away, but I think he definitely blew me away. Not that the other actors were bad, but I don't think they were meant to be like showcased like he was. So
sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, you're good.
I think the chemistry, whether it was an actor with him or even side actors acting together, I think there was a really cool sense of, not really cool sense. I think the chemistry was really good throughout the actors and actresses.
Whether it cast,
whether it was like that in real life, behind the scenes, I don't know, but when the camera started rolling, they really took the lines, they understood the story, and they just went for it. They didn't hold back. And that kind of ties into what you're saying about how a lot of the times they just, let the camera roll. And I think that it captured a lot of that chemistry and a lot of that energy that they brought. Because not only did George bring a lot of energy by himself, but whether he was interacting with someone else or whether it's other characters like the other workers at the building and loan or something, there was just a lot of energy that was brought to the table. Figurative table, not real table, but like there's a lot of energy and chemistry that was brought that I really enjoyed. Like I had fun watching these characters because I felt like I was there with them. Yeah.
The film is in black and white, and it looks awesome.
I don't think they had colored films at that time.
They did.
They did? 46.
Wizard of Oz came out in the 30s.
Ah, you're right.
And that's in color. Technicolor.
There is a colored version that exists of It's a Wonderful Life.
Inferior. Don't watch it. I don't know.
It's inferior according to
Jason. I didn't want us to watch the colored version. Like I wanted us to start with how it originally was made.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm interested to see what it looks like in a colored version. But
I'm sure it looks fine. But the movie was filmed to be black and white.
Correct.
And I know, like for the longest time, black and white kind of fell out of favor, but it's kind of coming back. Some movies are filming in black and white. And I mentioned this after we watched, the night we watched it. But you can see a very clear difference in something that has a black and white filter versus something intentionally filmed.
Oh, absolutely.
With that gradient. And it is a night and day difference, but
literally night and day, black and white.
What really stands out to me is how much it brings out the characters' faces. In particular, George, of course, because he gets most of the screen time. But everybody. But the lighting, and I'm sure the makeup, too, they had to probably do something to just make their facial features pop.
Yeah.
So every expression is caught in really great detail.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this to you or to you all when we were talking about it, where the lack of color kind of puts an emphasis on their expressions themselves. I think color informs a lot about our emotions. But now when you get rid of that, when you dress a character in a certain color to evoke a certain feeling, you can't do that as much in black and white. In fact, you can only do it in 3 colors, give or take.
The grayscale.
Yeah. So what you're left with is purely the performance.
Yeah.
To Wesley's point. And it very much is they probably had no choice but to film in black and white, even though color existed. At the time, it was super expensive.
Yeah.
And not very I know the Wizard of Oz did it 10 years before this, but it wasn't something that was easily achievable.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was difficult to work with. So it is a product of their limitations, but it kind of, when you have a limitation, it forces you to be creative. It forces you to do a little more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So while the visual language of anything can be hindered by not having color, I think the other aspects of visual language get put to the forefront. And I think this movie does it extremely well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you, Jason. The fact that you are filming knowing that it's going to be delivered in black and white, knowing that you're capturing it in black and white really does change how you're going to, light a scene. And you don't have color helping you separate the characters from the background, from the foreground, from each other. You have to really rely on where you're putting lights, because you are working with a lot less color. You're working with a grayscale. And I think they did it very well. And it's like, not only that, but they didn't have a one size fits all approach, because there are shots where it's very hard lighting. Like, for example, there's a shot where George Bailey runs up to the camera. He doesn't look at it, but he runs up to the camera, and it's supposed to really focus on his moment of realization that, holy smokes, I'm in a town right now that has a George that does not exist. Yeah. And you can see the terror in his face. Yeah. And that hard lighting and the way he's lit just really amplifies that. And then you have a contrast with when he sees Mary grown up at the school dance party. She was lit very differently. And they're like, they understood that this was a moment where they needed to convey how he saw her. And so they did things that very much, I think, amplified her beauty, and like the way they lit her hair, her face, it was very just complimentary to her. And, you know, I think there were more soft lighting techniques used for that, as opposed to when, you know, George has that moment of realization and terror, and it's just like very harsh. So yeah, lighting's fun.
I think just to kind of wrap us up on this, so we're not here for 4 hours, but I will say that I think how they used a lot of the snow and the lighting and the just production design, especially in the Christmas part of the movie, which is like the last third. It's not really a Christmas movie until the end of the movie, which is surprising. But I don't know. I feel like that just really gives you a sense of like warmth and like nostalgia, you know? There's just something about the Christmas season that evokes that. And I mean, this movie nails it with the visuals there, like this really well decorated, you know, home with all these lights and the Christmas tree, and you know, even like the clothes they're wearing, it just feels like Christmas, you know. And I think that's effective for giving this a nostalgic feel, which is great, especially with a movie that has really important things to say, like nostalgic themes. I don't know. I think that's just, I don't know if it was like that at the time, but I imagine even like in the 40s, Christmas was like a homey type time of year. It was a holiday that was respected for like the family getting together and all of that. So,
especially with it being post World War II, like I can imagine that theme very much hitting home for a lot of people, especially those coming home from the war, you know?
Yeah. For sure. Well, I think we're all It's a Wonderful Life'd out. I think we've talked extensively about that, and I think there's honestly a lot more we could talk about too.
Yeah.
But I think we should probably cap it there.
Gotta give
put a bow on it.
I get it.
I tried. It's okay.
No, I laughed.
Okay.
I give you a pity laugh.
Whoa. A pity laugh.
Well, we gotta give it our official rating.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10, easy for me. I know Jason doesn't do 10s, but I do.
It does get my coveted 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. So good.
I want to be present the day you give a movie 10 out of 10, Jason.
If it happens, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
I
would put it on my Mount Rushmore of movies to watch. I'm not even kidding. I know I've only seen it once like a week ago, but like not even a week ago, but I already would like, I don't think I've thought about a movie and analyzed it in deep dives, like what a movie says about the world, more than I have It's a Wonderful Life.
That's cool.
It's incredible. It really is. And maybe you could nitpick here and there, but for me, like, I don't even bother with that because I just think it's a perfect movie for me, just and what it says. And even with a kind of a black and white approach to like what it says about the world, I still think that's important. And yeah, it's a 10 for me, dog.
I would put it up there as like top movies of all time too that I've seen. Watching it, like when I saw it as a teenager, I definitely did not appreciate it as much as I did, when we just watched it a couple weeks ago or last week.
When you have a podcast to record and you have to like think about it deep, it's like you have a deeper.
Well, it's not just
appreciation
that.
of
It's
it,
like I'm an adult now.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I probably saw it like 10 years ago.
You were not an adult.
I was not an adult then. I don't know. There's just you just know you appreciate things more the older you get. That's just I think a fact of life.
Yeah.
And I definitely appreciated this movie more. Now, Asher, you don't give numbers. You give feelings. So I've taken it upon myself to track these. Do you remember what you said?
I did. Did I say provoking out of 10?
Yes, indeed. You said
Thought
it was
provoking out of 10.
provoking out of 10.
A provoking out of 10. Yeah.
Now, for the other two movies, it made a lot of sense, I think.
Yeah.
This one, I think, definitely needs a little explanation.
So, yeah, let me, you know what? In all honesty, I'm going to look at the definition of provoking to make sure I used it right.
No shame.
Okay, so according to Google Dictionary, which is definitions from Oxford Languages, provoke means to stimulate or give rise to a reaction or emotion, typically a strong or unwelcome one in someone. So
Typically
I think,
strong or unwelcome, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Right. So I think, and there's more definitions too. So I think that word is something I can still use for it. Basically, it kind of ties into what I was saying earlier. Like it's a movie that unapologetically invites itself into your own self-reflection. And for me, part of that warm and fuzziness that can come with this nostalgic type of movie and even Christmassy type of movie is that I was going to say something.
Sometimes nothing needs to be said.
So basically, how do I finish that sentence? I'll just say that it provoked me to look in my own self because I didn't want to end up like George Bailey in the sense of living a life so focused on things that I thought would bring me something, and this whole time I'm missing what actually is around me that is bringing me so much joy, peace, whatever it is. Like, I don't want to live a life where I'm so blinded that I look back and I'm like, I could have, like, I had it made, and I don't want to miss that. And so I think this movie is very unapologetic about that. They're like, hey, this isn't just a story about George, but I think it very much can invite you into doing your own self-examination.
Out of 10.
Out of 10.
Dwell on things that are good.
Amen.
Dwell on things that are good.
Well,
yeah. Dude.
Make sure
it's been a wonderful podcast.
It's a wonderful podcast, man.
Yeah.
This is maybe my favorite discussion that we've had so far.
Nice.
Christmas just brings out the best.
Yeah.
Goodwill towards men. Yet that should be all year round. But anyways,
I know.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said.
I know what you mean. I got you.
About the unifying
aspect
of the holiday.
Yeah.
Yes, we should all be nicer to each other all around the year. But it's nice to know that during certain parts of the year, everyone just agrees to be nice.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Yeah. I'm tracking with you. I love that too.
Right.
Well,
Asher, how can people find us?
Yeah.
On the World Wide Web.
So, if you've been listening before, you might know it. But for those who might be listening for the first time, we are on.
All the way and somehow made it all the way to the podcast.
To the end. So we are on Instagram. You can find us at On the Slate Podcast. We are also on YouTube. You can find us at On the Slate Podcast there as well. We are on Spotify and Apple right now, so thank you for listening there as well. If you want to reach out to us personally and give us your questions, give us your comments, any thoughts you might have, any feedback, you can reach out to us via email, and that is ontheslatepod@gmail.com.
Amazing.
Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas. We hope you have a wonderful Christmas. Sleep well tonight.
Santa's coming in the morning.
Santa's coming in the morning.
Leave cookies.
And milk. And celery. And don't forget about the reindeer and carrots.
And don't give large sums of money to your mortal enemy.
And don't gloat right before it either.
And that's really the whole lesson.
Be humble.
Of the movie. Anyway.
Be humble.
Well, this...
And a Happy New Year.
Yeah, and a Happy New Year.
Yes.
Prospero año y felicidad.
See.
Wow. Very good. Well, this has been the On the Slate Movie Podcast. I'm Wesley.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Asher.
God bless. God bless us, everyone.
Yeah. Nice.